what is your assessment of it? Is it actually Keir Starmer moving quite a long way from the position he ran on originally back in 2020? Is that the right analysis? And if it is it the right thing to do?
Well, I think two things are happening. One is that he's reconsidering, thinking through afresh the sort of policies, the program that he wants to set out to fight on at the next election and then implement should he be elected in government. That's one thing, and that accounts for his moving quite a long way from that 10-point manifesto on which he fought the leadership election in 2019-20. We can come back to that if you want, but it's now lost in the mists of. The second thing he's doing is finding the right people, both to raise Labour's campaign game between now and the election, and it's probably going to be at least a year, but also the people who are going to help him prepare those plans for government. The 5 missions that he's decided he wants to be the priorities for a Starmer-led Labour government. Well, they need to do more drilling down, more strength in depth, and that again is what's going to happen. You're going to see happening over the next year, and he's got better people, in my view, in place to help him do that.
I mean, Keir Starmer has been very keen to stress the differences between now and 97. In fact, was it Tony Blair's, I can't remember what it was called, Centrist Dad Fest thing. What was it called? The Future of Britain?
Future Britain Conference.
They were having in conversation on stage, and Keir Starmer was talking about how the political landscape now compares to 97. Let's just take a listen.
We've only won from opposition 3 times. And obviously 97 was last time. And the mood then was one of growing optimism. That song, Things Can Only Get Better, that resonated because it felt that was the mood of the country at the time. The economy was growing, and what Labour was able to come in and absolutely sort of turbocharge that sense that we're going to go into a new century, it's a new way of doing politics, modernising, things can only get better. That's not the position now, by a long shot.
Some people listened to that, Peter, and thought it's not very hopey change, is it? We can't promise that things are going to get better. Does Keir Starmer need to try and capture a bit of that?
No, I'm not sure that Keir's absolutely right about this in 97. I mean, he's right and wrong, because I think what characterised the election in 1997 was that we had just come out of a sort of ghastly decade of failure for the country, during which the Conservatives were falling out with each other and basically falling apart over Europe. But that's essentially how you could characterize Thatcher's election in 1979. She came in after a decade of quite shameful failure in the running of the country, the government of the country, first under Heath, and then not frankly very successfully under Wilson. And she said, right, great sea change got to take place. The last decade's has been a terrible failure. We've now got to close this chapter. She pulled the rug from underneath the consensus, the post-war sort of corporatist consensus system of government and approach, and said, no, it's time for something completely different. And that, of course, is exactly what Attlee did in 1945 as well. Attlee said, look at the 1930s, a terrible decade of failure, the public's interests completely let down. It's been an era of decline. We've got to turn the page and start afresh in this post-war world. And I think actually what Keir Starmer is able to point to is something very, very similar to Attlee, similar to Thatcher, similar to Blair. We've had a decade of failure. We've got to close this chapter, turn the page, and start a new chapter in our national story. I think that's really what the next election is going to be about.
Well, Peter, Keir has a shadow cabinet around him now who are prepared to speak about significant reform to public services and mean it and believe it when they say it in those key briefs like health and welfare, ditto the Treasury team, all the delivery briefs, education, are all people who believe what they say, believe that very Blairite mantra of reform. But how can, as the Times leader makes this point this morning, how can they do that without significant capital investment in a crumbling public realm? And where's the money going to come from?
Well, it's a perfectly good question, but it's one that will be much easier to answer in a year's time when we see what the state of the economy is. I mean, what the fiscal headroom that's available to us will be in a year's time depends on what's happened to the economy in the meantime and what the prospects for renewed economic growth will be. What our borrowing capacity will depend on borrowing costs at the time and what's happened to interest rates during the previous year, and also the confidence of the markets, how much they're prepared to lend. Now, I can't tell you, Patrick, sitting here in the beginning of September in 2023, what in over a year's time the state of the economy, the state of the markets will be, the state of treasury revenues will be, what the fiscal headroom will be. I can't tell you all these things.
So, Peter, is it a mistake then that we've seen that across the board, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer keep ruling out things, ruling out increasing income tax, ruling out, they oppose the increase in national insurance to help social care. Should they stop making promises like that? In fact, I think we've got a clip. This is Paul Johnson, director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who was on the show yesterday.
If you commit to increasing, as they have done, by hundreds and hundreds of thousands the number of people working in the NHS, which we need for the NHS to be working properly in 10, 15 years, you need to say that that's going to cost money. And the only way I can see that that money is going to come from is by higher taxes, because it's not going to come from cutting the schools budget or cutting the defence budget or cutting the justice budget. There just isn't the money there.
Is Paul Johnson right, Peter? And as a result, is Keir Starmer wrong to rule out increasing income tax?
I don't think he's wrong, because we are now at the highest level of tax in this country of any time since the Second World War. And with the cost of living crisis felt so severely by people, it's really not fair. It's not right. It's certainly not election winning to go into an election and saying, well, we've got sky high taxes and we're going to load more onto them. No, I don't think you can do that. But there may well be, and Paul Johnson would be the first to acknowledge this, that the fiscal state of the country will depend, as I say, on the state of the economy, the prospects for growth, and therefore treasury revenues, which we can appraise in a year's time.
Peter, before I let you go, if Keir Starmer did pick up the phone, Gordon Brown style, and say, come on, join the gang again, have a job, you're in the House of Lords already, so you don't need to go through that rigmarole again, would you do it?
Well, it's a lovely idea, but I don't think it's going to happen. And anyway, there's quite a lot I can do with them and for them, from the confines of my present office. I'm going to give them all the help they want and all the help they need to get elected and to prepare their plans for government. I don't have to be, on the inside track in order to do that. It's what I do to a certain extent already. I don't do as much with or for Keir Starmer, obviously, as I did for Tony Blair or Gordon Brown or indeed Neil Kinnock before them. But, where I can make a contribution, I always will, because I want Labour to be elected, because I think that's what we need, the sort of cathartic experience in this country of a change of government. And I believe in what the Labour Party now is saying it will do for the country if it's elected, in a way that I couldn't possibly have said with equal confidence under Jeremy Corbyn in 2019.
I think I've asked you if Jeremy Corbyn asked you in to help him out. I'm pretty sure I know what the answer would have been. Finally, Peter, I don't know if you heard earlier on, Danny Finkelstein was talking about how he ought to have a museum of political fiasco. Put Liz Truss's lectern in there. Chris said he'd put McDonald's Happy Meals and one of their disastrous reshuffles. And then what would you put in a museum of political fiasco?
I don't know. I've got one or two political fiascos of my own I could sort of put in the museum.
What have you got in mind?
I'm not sure I really want to go revisit them and
a pot of guacamole, Peter.
Indeed.